there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters.
Okay, for our final interview, I will be speaking with Professor Hugh Starkey. So Hugh Starkey is Professor of Citizenship Education at University College London's Institute of Education. As an expert in the field of citizenship, he has worked as a consultant to the Council of Europe, UNESCO, the European Commission, and the British Council. Professor Starkey was invited here to JALT to give a plenary talk on Cosmopolitan Citizenship and Language Learning, and he also gave a workshop on intercultural interactions in the language classroom. Great. So maybe just by way of starting, could you give us a brief career history, how you ended up as a professor of citizenship education?
Okay. Yes, very willingly. So after I left school, so age 17, 18, I was able to enroll on a volunteer program. It's called Voluntary Service Overseas, VSO, which in those days took young people and placed them as teachers in a range of countries. I was sent as an English language teacher to Algeria. I'd done my background, my studies at school were French and German, were my majors, so I was a linguist. I was given a 1-week TEFL training and then sent to a classroom with 50 students in this newly independent country that was Algeria. One of my colleagues, that is to say another young person who went in the same year, the same time, but in another town in Algeria, was Michael Byram, who has subsequently become also famous for his work on intercultural education. So that was a really mind-expanding experience that left me very interested in issues of the diversity of wealth and poverty in the world, of political structures, of how people get emancipated, freedom, and politically struggle for equality. During my time as an undergraduate, so my BA degree, every summer I would teach TEFL for a private language school. Interestingly, it had a place in UCL, actually was one of its summer programs. And so I have some experience as a TEFL teacher. I then trained as a teacher of other languages, so of French and German. Started off as a teacher of French and German and did about a decade of that. During that time, I also worked for the Cambridge assessment system, developing English language tests. I did work there for 2 years as a research assistant. After that decade, I got an opportunity to work in higher education, training teachers of languages. But all through this time, I'd had a more political interest in, so broadly speaking, multicultural education. We used to call it world studies. And so after that, I then started my work with the Council of Europe, who were just developing a program of human rights education. And it seemed to me that human rights, when I discovered it, is a system that actually makes sense of everything. It brings in kind of feminist perspectives, diversity perspectives. Actually, it's a universal system of values by which we can judge a social situation. So I got very interested in human rights education. All the time, I was still carrying on my main profession as teacher of languages, in this case French, I worked for a while for the Open University, developing courses on French, German, and Spanish. Then there was an opportunity with the introduction of citizenship as a subject in the curriculum in England, to start training teachers of citizenship, because there were nobody had ever trained teachers of citizenship. I said that what I'm doing in my French classes is actually teaching about political education and politics and culture in those societies. I think I could train teachers of citizenship. And within citizenship, I think I can do human rights education. This will be a space in the curriculum to do human rights education. So when there was a job advertised to develop a new program on a master's level program on citizenship at the Institute of Education, which was by distance learning, and I'd been at the Open University, I thought this job has got my name written on it, and so it proved. And so I've been then mostly involved with citizenship education for the past decade, and eventually was allowed to call myself Professor of Citizenship and Human Rights Education, in fact. And so I work with doctoral students, some of whom, I've got 3 Japanese doctoral students, one of whom was here at the conference, but other students as well.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Your plenary talk yesterday was on cosmopolitan citizenship. So maybe, by way of continuing, could you define cosmopolitan citizenship for us?
Okay, I can try. So first of all, I wanted to talk about citizenship, which I said needs to be taken away from the government perspective, which is that it means the passport, and it's about borders and stopping immigrants and so on. But citizenship is a very useful term about people living together in a society, recognizing that there is a political dimension to life, even if they can't necessarily name it, but there are struggles going on all the time in personal relations and in every sphere of life. So living together in community is what citizenship is about. It's a feeling of belonging, it's acting as citizen. So cosmopolitan citizenship is feeling that you belong not only in your local community, but you are part of a worldwide community of people. All human beings are equal in dignity and rights. This we get from, amongst other things, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But if you're a religious person, you would get it through the Catholic Church or Islam or whatever. They all say that they embrace everybody. If you're a particularly ideological person, you might say international socialism. These are all ideas where people see themselves as part of a global movement. So cosmopolitan citizenship is seeing the global at the local level, and acting locally and wherever you are up to globally as a citizen, so working with others for justice. So feminists will work with other feminists. You learn about women's studies in the USA, you come back to Japan and you initiate it here, for instance. But also other things.
Okay, great, thank you very much. I think maybe when a lot of us, maybe especially as language teachers who have worked in different cultures different from our original culture, when we hear things like cosmopolitanism and global citizen, I think those are things that we maybe proudly want to self-define ourselves as. What are some challenges that, I guess not only us, but anybody would face to become or to be a global citizen?
Okay, so I have to work with the term global citizen or global citizenship because it's become part of the discourse and it's in very many official publications and so on. So I have to kind of work with it, but I always challenge it and say, actually what we want is cosmopolitan citizenship. And there is a distinction because the global citizen kind of implies a system of world government, I think. I don't believe in a system of world government. I think the UN does the best job it can, but it's not a system of world government. It's a system of maybe governance. It's a system of relationships between nations. But I don't think there is such thing as a global citizen. So hence I prefer cosmopolitan citizenship, and which for me is about people to people. I was talking yesterday about the diplomatic view of languages, where you ascribe an identity to people as identifying them with a place or a nation that you perceive them to come from, like the professional Englishman or whatever. We have to be aware of those ascribed identities. I think that's another pitfall. Cosmopolitan citizenship is about person-to-person relationships. It doesn't have to have borders and nations. We transcend that.
Okay, great, thank you. You also referenced Dewey in your plenary, and you talked about, well, I guess what he mentioned about moving from a more global situation to the nation-state situation. I guess 19th century it happened, and we're still clearly in the nation-state era, but also I think a lot of people feel that the world is becoming more globalized. Do you see that a move back to that kind of globalization in the future? I mean, it doesn't feel like the nation-state is going anywhere.
Right. So the world is organized on the basis of nation-states, and I totally accept that. So another quote I gave in my talk yesterday was from Charles Taylor, who says we have no option to be cosmopolitan and patriots. So this is not either or. It's cosmopolitanism and patriotism. But, he said, what sort of patriotism? It's not a mindless patriotism that simply kind of salutes the flag or waves the flag or whatever it's being asked to do. And people have been asked to go to war and so on the basis of patriotism. No, the kind of patriotism that Charles Taylor from Canada is talking about is where you are proud of your country because it is supporting human rights. Now, I think many people would be proud of Japan for being a peaceful nation. This whole constitution based on peace, that is the kind of patriotism that Japanese people would really be proud of. And when I see political attempts to kind of undermine that, then this is where there is a potential political struggle that may occur.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So maybe trying to tie all this to language teaching a little bit, and maybe touching on some of the issues that were discussed earlier. Do you think that all language teachers have a responsibility to make their classrooms more global or more cosmopolitan?
Absolutely. So education by definition is about the future, isn't it? So kind of we're looking to a future. We first have to think, what kind of future do we want? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I quote it as a text, but it is about a world of freedom, justice and peace. So this is a vision that we have inherited. So that is kind of what we're trying to do. So we can reflect on our practice to see the extent to which what we're doing on any particular day is contributing towards freedom, justice and peace. And then the way the classroom is organized, the language classroom, I've always been profoundly admiring of language teachers, and myself practiced it, because the whole point of a language classroom is that the teacher says the least possible so that the classroom can say the most possible. So pair work, group work, and so on, is second nature to language teachers. Well, this is a profoundly democratic way of working, because as Dewey says, democracy it's more than a form of government. It's actually a way of living together. It's about making sure that everybody gets included in the debate, making sure that the women students get as included as the men students, and so on. So that is very, very relevant. In terms of, we've raised the question on this panel already, is political education not perhaps brainwashing? And I did mention the fact that there are political forces in Japan that maybe run counter to the peaceful constitution that is there. No, it's not brainwashing, because the whole essence of human rights is freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So, and this is these are international norms and standards. So we should be able to find expression for a whole range of ideas, even if those ideas are not popular with the government at the time.
Okay. Yep, thanks. This is maybe not a technical question, but I think maybe hopefully a very practical question in terms of what we do in the classroom. So what it sounds like is you very much promote teachers giving students the opportunity to discuss a lot of these issues. Sometimes as teachers we hear views and opinions from students, racist views, sexist views that we strongly disagree with and maybe go counter to things like the human rights. What do you propose we do in those situations?
Oh. Okay, so one of the things that any teacher can do in a classroom is to have some kind of charter or a list of procedural expectations. So, for instance, that we respect each other. So that we that racist or sexist language is not appropriate in a classroom, because it's antithetical to human rights and equality's approach. So we can actually get to state that at the outset. These are the procedural rules of this classroom. And many teachers will do that with their students. These are class charters that we draw up together, which are designed to make sure that everybody is able to be involved. Apart from that, as I said at the workshop, I really don't believe, I think it's a very poor educational practice to have, say, a whole class discussion and pick on a student and ask them to give a view. Because, as I said, there is a sense in which I don't know what I think until I hear what I say, which Steve was sort of implying. That is to say, the process of articulating thoughts actually makes those thoughts crystallize better. So in my classroom, I say no information, no request for information without rehearsal. So the language classroom is a space where first you rehearse and then you contribute. And that also goes for a citizenship classroom as well. So you set a task, you pose a problem, you get the students to discuss it, maybe in pairs and then in fours, and then you report back on behalf of the group, not on behalf of an individual. By that time, hopefully, the racist or sexist view has been argued out a bit, because peer pressure is very important. If it hasn't happened, then probably there will be other people in the room who will be able to provide counter-arguments to that. If it is actually insulting language, then clearly you rule that out, and everyone will accept that is not appropriate in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Your workshop today was on intercultural interactions in the classroom. Again, how do you define an intercultural interaction?
Okay, so it's partly this perspective of getting away from the diplomatic view of language teaching. So language teaching has very often been about perceiving people to belong to a particular nation. So French people, Japanese people, English people, American people. And generalizations about such folk are widespread, I think, still in textbooks and in materials that we use. So what my work is trying to do is to get away from this diplomatic view, which I would say is an international view. And international includes the word nation, so that's a diplomatic view, towards an intercultural view that is about recognizing that nations are constructs, they are things that have culturally formed and so on. And so we share not on the basis of who we are perceived to be in terms of our nationality, but on the basis of our shared interesting backgrounds, and we can gain from each other. We all have lots to bring in the classroom. Everyone has a contribution.
And the country we come from is just one level in that.
One level in that. Yeah. It may be relevant.
Right. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll stop there. But thank you again to Professor Hugh Starkey.
Thank you very much for listening today. Our next interview, recorded as part of our forum, will be coming shortly. In the meantime, you can contact us by emailing at TEFLology@gmail.com, following us on Twitter at TEFLology, liking our page on Facebook, and by listening to our previous episodes, TEFLology-podcast.com. Please also feel free to rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or Acast. If you'd like to show your support for our podcast, please consider buying our ebook, Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, available on Amazon and Smashwords. All money made from sales will go directly back into making more podcasts for you, the listener. Okay, so thanks again, and we'll be back again soon.